So let me know when you see my screen.
Yep, see that now.
Cool. Well, so thanks for the folks that are here to chat about .NET Framework apps. So, as Derek mentioned earlier, my name is Isaac Levin. I'm a .NET developer advocate at AWS. And my primary area of focus is to just show the plethora of options on AWS for .NET developers to be successful, because all I really care about is .NET developer success, because I love the platform. I've been a .NET developer my entire professional career. So this presentation / conversation that we're going to have is very much around what can you do, or what do I do, if you use the first person tense, with these old .NET Framework apps that we've been building for 20 years, right? If you have any interest in seeing more content that I create, so I'm out there on GitHub or Twitter or Twitch as well. My handle there is Isaac R11. I'm also starting up a video series on YouTube about just AWS for .NET developers. So there's one video out, and there'll be another one out. I'll probably publish it today. So yeah, if you're interested in this sort of content, if you're curious about AWS, you're a .NET developer, definitely recommend you following me. Worst case, I'm sometimes funny. At least that's what people say. So with that, let's get started. So why .NET 6, right? So I think before we start talking about migration paths and modernization and strategies and all those sort of things, it might be a good idea to talk about where we are right now. And I think one of the things that's really, really important to call out about .NET, the current version of .NET today being .NET 6. For folks that aren't following the current .NET train, .NET comes out every year now. So in November of last year, 2021, .NET 6 was released. And coming up November of this year in 2022, there's going to be a .NET 7. So and we'll talk about support and things like that a little bit in the future. But one thing to just call out as it pertains to .NET going forward is all even years are all odd years. Sorry, there will be an LTS version of .NET. So basically what that means is if you're on a .NET that's an even number, that has long-term support for 3 years. And then the in-between years, you don't get that. So for instance, .NET 6 is LTS, which means you get its support for 3 years from 2021. So end of 2024 is when you'll have support for .NET. And by that point in time, there'll be more .NETs that come out and with LTSs as well. So why .NET 6? So one thing to call is really, really valuable about .NET is that, if you've listened to any of the messaging from the .NET team, it very much is .NET is a cross-platform framework that allows you to build apps that run basically anywhere. So if you've been a .NET developer for some time, you're very familiar with .NET Framework and its ties into Windows, right? And I think one of the things that's great about .NET currently is that, again, you can kind of run it anywhere. So whether that's on Windows still, or you want to run on Linux or Mac or a Raspberry Pi or your watch or a TV, for instance, if you own a Samsung TV that's been built in the last few years, Tizen, which is like the operating system for your TV, your smart TV, is actually written in .NET. So kind of really cool to think about what you can build with .NET and where those apps can live. Also, there's been tons of performance and productivity improvements in the .NET space since .NET Framework, right? And allows us to do all sorts of really complex tasks like deploying to the cloud and things like hot reload and all these sort of things. I highly recommend, if you haven't yet, to take a look at what .NET 6 brings to the table and how you can use it to really build awesome solutions that are modern and forward-thinking. And as we go through kind of the progression or the chronological history of .NET, it's good to think about where we started, right? So folks might be familiar with the .NET framework. If you've run .NET 1.0 or 2.0 or whatever, all the way up to 4.8, which is the current current version of .NET framework, you're familiar that there's that tie into Windows. In a particular point in time, a handful of years ago, the .NET team started to look into opportunities to build cross-platform versions of .NET. They saw the last item on that left-hand side, which is the Xamarin mono framework from Xamarin. where they actually took and made an implementation of .NET or that ran on other operating systems, Mac and Linux specifically. So they saw the work that was being done there, and they said, we really should be thinking about non-Windows support for .NET. So they created another version of .NET. That's a gross over exaggeration, but another version of .NET named it .NET Core. And that's grown through its progressions, .NET Core 2.0 and 2.1, 2.2, 3, whatever, right? Into 3.1, which is the current LTS version of .NET Core. So, oops, I went backwards. So what they wanted to do is let's take all these technologies that occurred after. So one thing to call it's really, really valuable is that during this time, Microsoft acquired Xamarin, which was the company that built the technology for Mono. So taking all those learnings from Mono, taking all the learnings from .NET Core, taking all the learnings from .NET Framework, they decided to encapsulate all of them into what they're calling .NET moving forward. And basically, it summarizes to all of these great experiences that we as .NET developers have become accustomed to with a forward-thinking approach for running them anywhere. But what does that actually mean? So now that you see it's the same thing that we saw earlier, so there's versions here. So if you're using .NET Framework 4.8, there are no more features. There's only bug fixes, security patches, things like that. One thing that's really important to call out is that if you're on 4.8, you're going to have support for .NET because .NET Framework 4.8 ships in Windows. And as long as it ships in Windows, there's going to be support for .NET Framework because we understand that there are some apps that, because of the dependencies that you have inside of Windows, you might not be able to move them over to .NET in a very effective way. And again, it's really, really important to be aware of that and think about how much effort it's going to be for that modernization journey. Like I mentioned earlier, .NET Core 3.1 is the current implementation of .NET Core. And when they saw they were running into a situation as they got, through the lifeline of .NET Core 3.1, they realized .NET Core 4.0 would be a terrible idea because there's already a .NET 4, a .NET Framework 4 specifically, but in the community, it's referenced very heavily as .NET 4. So they realized that naming something .NET Core 4.0 might be challenging. So they took an opportunity to think about how we can actually think forward about .NET going in the future. And a part of that is they took the Mono runtime and they merged it up into the .NET Core code base. And the outcome of that was .NET 5, which came out in November of 2020. So, and then moving along, they merged a little bit of the runtime into 5.0 and a little bit of runtime into 6, right? So that's where we are today. So what does that actually mean? It means that when you see .NET 5 or .NET 6, we're talking about the aggregation of all of the work that's been done in the .NET Core workstream as well as the Mono runtime workstream, and really coming forward with one singular approach to building .NET apps for any platform. So what is not in .NET 6? It's important to call out because, again, .NET has been around for 20 plus years. So there's been all sorts of different component models that have been introduced that folks might have built their apps on, built apps that drive their business on. And we want to make sure that, for the most part, that those similar experiences can be ported to .NET 6. However, there are some component types that aren't. That ones that are tied specifically to Windows. So for instance, some really, really well-known ones that folks always call out are web forms and WCF, right? So there are recommended or known replacements for those particular component types. However, most of the time they are complete rewrites of functionality. If you're using WCF, there is an open source community project called Core WCF, which folks from the .NET team contribute to, folks from AWS contribute to, but it isn't an officially .NET team supported component type. The recommended replacement for WCF is gRPC, which is a newer framework that allows you to have remote procedure calls. So if you're using web forms as well, which a lot of folks build applications with web forms for even to today, people still build web forms applications. The component model that's recommended if you're in the .NET 6 world is Blazor. And if you haven't heard of Blazor, Blazor more or less, to summarize it, is a component type that allows you to have single page application, web quote unquote 2.0 experiences, dynamic page loading, things like that, all written in C#. So there isn't a dependency on JavaScript to do some of that front end functionality. That's a really large summarization what Blazor provides, but the component model is somewhat similar to web forms, so it's a decent replacement from a work perspective. So again, that's what's not in .NET 6. One thing to also call out that's really, really important about .NET going forward is that how we actually target different platforms on .NET is it changed a bit. So if you are a .NET Framework developer and you've ever opened up a VB proj file or a CS proj file, which is the project file for your particular .NET project, you'll notice that there's a lot of stuff in there. And if you've opened one in .NET Core or .NET 5 or .NET 6, you've noticed that it's substantially different. That's because as a part of .NET Core and .NET 5 and .NET 6, we've gone through this process of kind of trying to simplify the project file to just basically make it a bit more approachable. But what that means is that we have more simplified framework names to be able to target specific platforms to build .NET apps on. So if you created today like a .NET using the .NET command line or using Visual Studio, like file new project or .NET new and then something like console or web or whatever. So if you'd open up the CS proj from that, which you can do in Visual Studio, by the way, which is a great experience, you'll see that you have a target framework of .NET 6.0, which means that that application will use the .NET 6 SDK and the .NET 6 runtime to be able to run on miscellaneous platforms. And what .NET 6.0, it replaces .NET Core app, which is the target framework for .NET Core, and .NET Standard, which is the target framework for .NET Standard application, or .NET Standard projects. If you're not familiar with .NET Standard is more or less a contract of the existing well-known APIs that everybody's familiar with, the system.data of the world, systems.collection.generic of the world, that aren't platform dependent. So it gives you the opportunity to build class libraries and projects that you can have clients that run different flavors of .NET. So for instance, you can have a .NET Standard class library that's referenced from a .NET Framework application as well as a .NET 6 application. So it's about providing interoperability. When we go down, we talk about, so after you have .NET 6.0, which is like that top level target framework, you start to add specific TFMs or target framework monikers to it. So for instance, Dash Windows, if you're having applications that need to run specifically on Windows, and Android and iOS if you're using mobile development. And what these TFMs represent is specific flavors of .NET that include specific OS functionality. And from a graph perspective or from a charting perspective, going forward, you'll have on the bottom that .NET x.y, so primary, secondary versions, .NET 6.0, for instance, and that encapsulates all of what's in .NET Core App 3.1 and .NET Standard 2.1. And then if you need to abstract that to a particular platform, you would go .NET x.y dash whatever your platform is, iOS, Android, Windows, Mac, Catalyst, what have you. So when we build applications, what libraries should we be targeting, right? So if you're building cross-platform libraries today, for instance, ASP.NET Core, Entity Framework, or basically anything that's under the system dot namespace, your target framework, you want that to be 6.0. Transversely, if you're building apps that run specifically on Windows, like desktop clients like WinForms, WPF, or Manage UWP, the target framework that you're going to want to use is .NET 6.0-Windows. And then continuing down the line, for instance, if you're building cross-platform libraries and need to use .NET Framework, I mentioned earlier, .NET Standard 2.0 is a great option for you in that case. So the question goes, what should you be targeting, right? So if you have existing .NET applications, .NET Framework applications, sorry, and you need to be able to provide functionality for those .NET Framework apps, as well as new apps that you might be building with .NET 6 in the future. Continue to use .NET or to use .NET Standard, so .NET Standard 2.0. If you are building applications that need to run in multiple different platforms, for instance, mobile apps or Raspberry Pis, for instance, consider using .NET Standard 2.1. So with .NET Standard, every version of .NET Standard, you get more and more APIs available to you, but you get less and less support for other platforms. For instance, between .NET Standard 1.6 and 2.0, you might have some experiences that you get more experience out of them, but there's less application types that can target that particular class library. Hope that's helpful. If not, please jump in and ask a question we can definitely chat about. If you're building new apps going forward that don't have any ties to anything other than .NET 6 or .NET 7 or .NET 8 or what have you, so no ties to .NET Framework, no ties to Mono or Xamarin, use 6.0. So for instance, you can build class libraries with .NET 6.0 today. So now that we've kind of talked about .NET in general and where we are and how we got there, it might be a good idea to start talking about, okay, well, I have some .NET Framework apps. What do we want to do, or what can we do to get us from where we are now to where we want to be? We want to be on .NET 6 or .NET 7. How do we get there? So I see the typical workflow is four-phased, right? So the first phase being a preparation step. So you want to build like a rich assessment of what's going on with your application. So particular like package references. So if you're referencing packages in NuGet or even just loose binaries, just they're referencing via project references, if you have front-end dependencies, if you're using what specific APIs you're using. So there's some great tools for that. So Porting Assistant for .NET, which is a tool that the .NET team has built. There's also .NET Upgrade Assistant Analyze. There's also the Porting Assistant for .NET by AWS, which I'll be showing a demo of in a little bit. So the second step is upgrade. So you run that Porting Assistant, and one of the things that's really, really important is that the Porting Assistant gives you two different modalities, and this is the Porting Assistant for .NET from AWS I'm speaking about. So you can run it inside of Visual Studio, or you can run it as a standalone IDE, and I'll show you what that experience looks like. So you can actually run a port, and what it will do is it will attempt at its best to actually upgrade your project from a particular version of .NET, so .NET Framework 3.5 and above, all the way to .NET 6 or .NET Core 3.1 if you want that. And then the next step, obviously, after you run that particular upgrade, is that your app probably will not build, and that's just part of the process. But you'll be able to hop into Visual Studio and take a look at some of the warnings that you're getting. Maybe if you're getting particular build errors, maybe you're getting some NuGet packages that are no longer valid or no longer supported or have deprecated APIs that you might be taking advantage of. So getting to that point where your code actually builds, that's a great checkpoint for you. Also do this in other branch as well. So upgrade step, fix code and build step, do it in a place where it's not going to affect your experience if you need to contribute, like provide a bug fix or something to the actual production version of your application, because more than likely this code you might need to toss it away and start again in certain capacities, and you don't want to be a blocker to yourself or to other folks on your team as you go through this exercise. But finally, if you get to a point where your code builds, the next step is running and testing, right? So making sure that all of your test projects, which also you can port to .NET 6 as well, making sure they run successfully, your code coverage is great, you have a debugging experience that works well locally, and then if you have the opportunity to deploy it somewhere for folks to actually do user acceptance testing, that is the process in a nutshell, right? And I know it seems pretty straightforward when you look at that all in a row. It's like, okay, I prepare, I upgrade, and then I just fix it, and then I make sure that it works. But it's really important to think about, like, you have to be tactical with all these different steps, because if we just go in without doing our preparation step and we just try to update our code, it's going to set us up for, I don't want to say failure, but it's going to result in an unideal situation where people might get frustrated. We might be making wrong choices as it pertains to how we're fixing our code. So properly going through this workflow, at least in my opinion, is a great way to get from where we are to where we want to be. And the next thing becomes, as a part of, that fix code and build step, right, is how do we rewrite, what do we rewrite versus what can we reuse? One of the things that I love to say, if you have any business logic or things that, maybe you're interacting with a database or you're interacting with some files somewhere, or you're just running particular business logic, you can keep that code. Also, if you're a heavy user of MVC, so things like controllers, views, and models, they can be reused as well. There will be some slight modifications that will need to be done, but for the most part, you can keep all of those classes. So it's really important to start to think about, okay, what is code that I can actually reuse? And a great part of that that upgrade or that fix step that I love to think about is, can I start moving more and more code to shared libraries or to places where it's not in my web project? Because once I had the opportunity to do that, and the only thing that's in my web project are things like, ASP.NET startup code or MVC configuration, maybe using configuration manager, HTML modules, things that that you have to rewrite, that piece is substantially smaller. So you have all of this really important business logic that drives the actual application somewhere that's reusable, and you have basically the client or the end experience type of functionality in your project. You have that, and that's something that you'll need to be rewriting. So a great tool, like I mentioned a bit earlier, for our analysis and upgrade approach is using the .NET Upgrade Assistant. Like I mentioned, it's a tool provided by the .NET team that supports MVC, WinForms, WPF, console apps, and it's a command line based tool that basically gives you two different workflows. So one is that analyze phase, which is basically what it does is it scans your project, scans your solution, then scans your projects to identify areas that will need to be upgraded, and it provides that report to you in a proprietary format called Serif. And then if you feel comfortable or you feel risky, depending on how much work it's going to be, you can go through the upgrade process, which actually automates step by step all of the manual things that you'll need to do. For instance, updating the project type or the project file to that new SDK style project type that I was talking about earlier, retargeting projects to the correct TFMs and so forth, right? So two different pieces of functionality. If you use the porting assistant for .NET from AWS, it's, like I said, it's a standalone tool that's visual. So it gives you visual breakdowns of all the things that you might need to do as you go through your assessment process. It's open source on GitHub, just like the .NET Upgrade Assistant from the .NET team. It supports .NET 3.5 and all the way up to .NET 6 and probably other versions of .NET in the future, and .NET Core 3.1, which is also LTS if you need it. So support is for MVC class libraries and WCF. So one thing that's really, really interesting to call out is that even though WCF isn't an officially supported version of WCF, there's been a ton of work in the community to get WCF core to a place where it could be a viable option for you. And what the porting system for .NET will do is it'll take those WCF projects and attempt to port them to WCF core, which I think is really, really valuable. And there's some interesting things coming in the future, and I heavily recommend. I'll provide a link for some of the things to follow here, following along with what the porting system is doing and using it as an opportunity to really, really help you in your journey. So with that, I'll pause for questions if anybody wanted to have a discussion. I do have a demo as well, but since we're kind of a smaller group, I know I just chatted for 30 minutes or so. So I'm more than happy to hear some of your folks' pains or war stories or what have you. Otherwise, I can just get right into the demo. Anybody want to bring anything up? All right. I'm just going to go. Silence is the best answer to, are you enjoying this? So let's just go ahead and go forward. So let's start off with the porting assistant. So as you can see right here, let me just upgrade my credentials. Oh, no. Oh. That's not good. All right. Anyway, if this fails, I have an idea of what I need to do, and I can figure that out in a second. But this is the porting assistant for .NET. And what it is a visualization tool that allows you to walk through the assessment and potentially porting of solutions or projects from some version of .NET to a version of the newer LTS version of .NET. So as you can see here, I have a handful of assessed solutions, and I'm just going to click on one of them here. So NLP Commerce. So if you're not familiar with NLP Commerce, it is a open source e-commerce platform that you can go out to GitHub today and clone it and use it as an inspiration to build out your e-commerce platform or e-commerce experience for your business. So what's really, really good when you open up a larger project. So like I mentioned, this is a fairly larger project. I believe that there's 31 projects here. So when you open this up, it gives you a ton of information right from the beginning of all of the different things that potentially, let me just make this a bit bigger, that we'll need to be taking some thought into as it pertains to what we'll need to do if we go through this porting exercise. So for instance, if you look at the assessment overview, it'll say that, okay, you have 44 of 62 incompatible NuGet packages and some numbers around build errors and things like that. You can also scroll down and look at your projects, and it'll actually give you line by line each individual project and what their framework is. So right, for instance, NLP Web is Net 451. There's 4 reference projects and what have you. It fails a build today, incompatible APIs, and so on and so forth. So if you can drill into any of these, and then it just gives you more and more information. So you can take a look at some of the NuGet packages that are here, for instance, Entity Framework or MaxMind or what have you. You can then hop over to project references for a particular project or the solution at large, and it will show you a graphical representation of all the different project dependencies that your application has. So for instance, this is very, very helpful as you're looking to kind of chart okay, what projects do I need to upgrade at what particular time? For instance, like if you decided that NLP Core was the first project that you wanted to update or port, these are all the projects that would be dependent upon that. So potentially not the best first approach. Maybe look for an opportunity to port a project that only has one dependency or has no dependencies, right? Or other projects are not dependent on it. So this gives you a really, really good top level view of where you're at with your application. So that's project references. And then you can go on as well to the API section. So in this particular project, there's no APIs, but let's hop out and look at NuGet packages for all the solution, right? So again, shows you all the different NuGet packages that are referenced and projects that reference them. For instance, Microsoft ASP.NET.MVC, 28 projects are referencing that. AutoFact, for instance, which is compatible, you can actually upgrade it. It'll show you a suggested replacement version of AutoFact as referenced by 13 projects. I can then go into APIs and get a very, very similar experience, right? So, okay, the amount of projects that use a particular namespace. So for instance, NLP, there's 564. iDisposable, Endpoint, Stack Exchange.Redis, for instance, right? So this shows you all of the different APIs that your application is dependent on and what the potential migration path is. And then finally, which I think is probably the most valuable piece, is you can actually look at source files. So it will actually, let's just open one of these up. It'll scan your code, and let's scroll down until we find a message. All right, for instance, right here. So it says incompatible method invocation. So for instance, this particular API for creating a PayPal payment, it's incompatible with the newest version of the PayPal NuGet package. So having all this information kind of at your disposal, you could say, okay, well, these are all the coding changes that I'll probably need to make to get this project to build. So it's not actually doing all this work for you, but it's putting you in a position where you can be substantially more successful. So that's a really, really great option for you. And I know this is just an assessment, like that first part phase. I actually wanted to show you that you can actually use this tool to actually port your applications from some version of .NET to .NET 6. So going back into my assess solutions, I have Newtonsoft.json, an older version of Newtonsoft.json, which is targeting .NET Framework 4.5. If you're not familiar with newtonsoft.json, it's the most downloaded NuGet package. It's used by tons and tons and millions of .NET applications probably. And its primary responsibility is serializing and deserializing JSON data. So I've actually done an assessment already for this particular project. And as you can see, there's no incompatible packages and there's a couple of incompatible APIs, but I can actually go in here and port it. So when I port it, it asks me, okay, so this is the selected product version. You can specify the target framework that you want and then hit that. So if I click port, it's going to start porting it. And depending on how big the project is, it could take some time. So let's just step away from this for a second while this is porting. And I wanted to show you another tool. So like I mentioned earlier, the .NET Upgrade Assistant from the .NET team, it's a command line based utility. So what I can do here is I'm inside a particular, let's just open this up just for grins. So I have an application, which is a WinForms application with one class library. And I'm going to actually take this application, let me zoom in a little bit. I can actually take this application and port it from the current version of .NET that it is, which is .NET Framework 4.5, import it to .NET 6 using the assessment, using the upgrade part of the tool. And what I'll do is I'll actually step through into each individual step and show you what it's actually doing as it pertains to that experience. So let's minimize this and let's just go .NET upgrade. And then I specify a project. Upgrade. I think it's .NET upgrade actually. Upgrade, and then you provide matching game solution. .NET upgrade is not it. So I'm completely forgetting what it is. So let's just go and look at the actual command that it needs to run. I just can't remember it off the top of my head. So upgrade assistant upgrade is what it is. So not .NET upgrade, upgrade assistant upgrade. So let's go back here, let's minimize this. So that, and then specify our solution. So this will actually walk us through the .NET Upgrade Assistant. Let's minimize that. Let's make this big. So what this is actually going to do is it actually uses Microsoft Build and a handful of other Roslyn analyzers to assess your solution, assess your projects for your solution, and then start to actually go through that upgrade. So it's all kind of interactive. So it says, select an entry point. So specify an entry point. Let's just select option 2, which is matching game.logic, which is a class library. And then it's going to start assessing. So as you can see here, apply the next step, which is backup project. I don't back up projects because I'm cool like that. So the next thing that's going to do, it's going to convert the project file to the SDK style. So let's go through that. And then that converts that successfully. And what I'm actually going to do here is while that's there, we'll actually open up Visual Studio, our Visual Studio Code, and see what actually got updated. So if we minimize this, this is everything. Let me just zoom out because it's a little bit more readable. Everything on the left-hand side is what it was, and this is what it was updated to on the right-hand side. So it's already starting to make a ton of changes. The next thing is it wants to add some Roslyn analyzers to the project, so it can actually start to analyze our project structure as well as our code base. So it'll do that. And then it did a bunch of steps here. So it looked for it, ran all these particular analyzers, and now it's going to upgrade the TFM. So let's do that. And then I'm going to kind of scoot through some of this and show you what it looks like at the end. So it updated the TFM in this case to Net Standard 2.0, as you can see. And then it's going to run some more analyzers. And then it ran some compatibility checks. Let's do that. So it's done. So let's finalize the project. And then it'll ask me to move on to the next one. So that particular project was run. And then, so if we go here, open this up, this is what it'll look like on the other side. So it's a class library. And then we're going to do with that same project, that Windows application. So let's do that. Select an entry point. This WinForms app, we're just going to fast forward through, hit 1 a bunch of times. Until it gets to some Windows-specific functionality. Bear with me as it converts and does all sorts of crazy things with this project. So adding those analyzers again to this particular project now. All right, updating the TFM. So it's going to recommend .NET 6.0-Windows because it detects that it's a WinForms application. And then it adds some compatibility analyzers to the project as well. All right. So it did a bunch of things just now. So one thing that it detected is that it wants you to specify the default font API, which is for WinForms applications. All right, and then the next thing is it wants to add the source updater for WinForms. So we'll do that. And then it updates our Windows desktop project. So it'll do that. So that's updating the project file. And then the last couple of steps is actually where it starts to actually look at your code and add some changes to your code to actually make it run effectively with .NET 6-Windows. So it applied some fixes there, and that, move on to the next project, and finalize the upgrade. Okay. So before I actually test to see if this works, let's actually go in and see all the changes that it made. So as you can see, it made a good amount of changes to a lot of different projects, right? So it added some code, set the high DPI mode in our program.cs. It added an app config. It added some new class files. But let's see if it actually works. So let's just do this. Let's just go .NET build. So make sure that it built the project. So let's actually go into the matching game project now, and let's just do .NET run. And look at that. So we took a .NET Framework application, and as you can see, it's just a matching card game. So nothing super exciting, and it's a silly demo, but it still is pretty cool. Oh, look, I got a match. I took that, which was .NET Framework 4.5, and I ported it over to .NET 6 using the upgrade assistant. So that's pretty cool. Let's see how we are doing in our Newtonsoft JSON. Okay, so as you can see here, it's ported it, and right now it's just assessing it. I know that this project is now ported, so let's just actually go into Visual Studio and let's just make sure it works. So let's create a new project, and I'm just going to create a .NET Console application. Let's just call it test JSON. And this is a .NET 6.0 long-term support version of .NET Framework. Hit create. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another project to the solution, which is that ported project that I mentioned earlier. So wait for this to get created, and then I'm going to add another solution here. I'm going to add existing project. And then I'm going to go to demos, Newtonsoft JSON. I saw it was in the porting folder, so let's do that. And then let's go there. So as you can see here, there is a new project here that I added to the Newtonsoft JSON project. If I open it up, it's .NET 6.0, and then we have some commented out reference assemblies. But I'm just going to actually write some code here. So let's do this. Let's just make this a bit bigger. So let's just create a list, and this is a new list of string. And in this string, let's just have foo and bar. Because all I'm doing right now is I'm just testing to see if our JSON serializer works. So I'm going to var JSON, and this is equal to JSON convert. I want to serialize this particular list object. I need to add a reference to Newtonsoft JSON. Let's do that. And then I want to serialize this object. And this is going to output a string. And let's just let's just console.writeLine this string, right? And then we'll have a console.readline at the bottom. Okay. Oops. Right. And then let's just, for grins, let's just convert it back. Var new list equals JSON, hitting tab too fast. Convert, deserialize object, and this want to be a list of string, and then we pass in JSON. So basically what I'm doing in this small little bit of code here is I'm creating a new list of strings, which has two items in it. I'm serializing that string into a JSON string representation of that particular object. I'm writing that to the console, and then I'm deserializing it back into that list of string. So again, this is a very, very simple demo, but I just wanted to show you that it actually works. So let's actually click test. Let's actually run our project. And this is going to build the project, so it might take a second. But what it'll do, oh, there are build errors. That's great. That's not good. Let's open this up. Oh, it looks like there's some code that needs to get removed. So let's take a look at this. So, so we're not running .NET Portable, so we can actually just remove all of this. All right, so let's try that again. All right, so build succeeded. It'll open up a console, and we'll see that string written out to the console that represents that list. So again, really, really silly demo, but it shows that you can actually take, using the porting assistant for .NET from AWS, you can actually take a project and port it from .NET Framework 4. I think it was 4.5. Is it 4.5? Yep, 4.5, and port it over to .NET 6, make a small coding change that I mentioned earlier, and reference it from a .NET 6 application. So really, really powerful stuff. That is what I had for my presentation. So again, my name's Isaac Levin. Thank you so much for tuning in. Would love to have a discussion right now. This link provides the link to this, the porting system for .NET, the upgrade assistant, this particular slide presentation, some useful information about migrating and modernizing .NET applications. So that's all I had for you. So let's, if folks feel comfortable coming on camera and let's just have a quick conversation about upgrading .NET apps. Again, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Isaac. That's wonderful.
No worries. Anybody have thoughts? Horror stories of upgrading .NET apps?
I've got plenty of those. I've got a massive project that's .NET Framework 4.7, I think now, and that's, yeah. We just seem to be constantly bombarded by Microsoft saying, yeah, stuff's going to go away soon. So we just need to get moving on that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it just seems to be an insurmountable kind of thing. So this tooling looks really, really good. I'm pleased to see that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's only a few of us here, but who knew about that porting assistant for .NET from AWS? Anybody know about it?
No.
Would it make your life better or easy, or would it help you as you go through your cloud migration journey, or not cloud migration, your .NET migration journey? Would it be valuable for you? Right. Yeah. Ish. Obviously, it depends on how big your project is. Like I think that's pretty fair to say. But like I mentioned through the actual presentation part, it's really, really important to, follow that workflow that I called out, right? Like you want to have like a really, really rich assessment of what your apps are doing, and what their dependencies are. Because if you just go in blindly and start just taking code and copying and pasting it to a new project, like you're probably going to be in for a bad time. So tools that allow you to effectively understand what's going on with your apps, because most of our apps, like, they weren't built by us initially and then maintained their entire life cycle by us, so we don't know all the inner workings of our apps. Usually we just maintain them. So getting a really rich understanding of that is really, really valuable. So that's my 2 cents in the matter. I think that there's really good use for these tools in the, that assessment phase. I think there's still a lot to gain from the upgrade phase as well. But again, it's really, really dependent on what you've done as it pertains to building your apps.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Anybody have any thoughts? Was this an enjoyable presentation? Was it boring? Was it not helpful? Were you expecting me to like answer every single problem that you ever had as a .NET developer?
That would have been nice.
Yeah.
It
We'll work on that next time. What was that, Bruce?
It was very helpful. I mean, it frightens me a bit because in the area I work in, which is transport planning, providing, analytical solutions, we have some fairly complex. So I'm very small. I mean, what you see is what I am. I mean, we've done things like Crossrail and major motorways in Europe. But what really frightens me is that the budgets we now have from central government and local authorities are a fraction of what we had, 10 years ago. And I'm just hoping that our, MVC5 .NET 4.8 will survive for at least 5 years, if not 10 years, because it's not possible.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I mentioned it a bit. Like I don't represent Microsoft. I don't represent the .NET team, so my opinion is only my opinion. But if you are on the latest version of .NET Framework 4.8, so 4.8.2, I think is the most current version, that's bundled into Windows 11. So Microsoft, at least based on current trends, they should support 4.8.2. And I think folks from the .NET team have said just as much. They would prefer you to look at upgrading, but I think the understanding is that if you can get on the latest version of .NET, making sure that you're secure, you have all the latest patch fixes, you should be good to go. And I understand that it's a journey even getting an app up to 4.8.2, right? If you wrote an app in 4.5 or 4.0, like getting it to 4.8 might be challenging. But if you can do that, if you can make that step, I think at least my hope is that you'll be able to sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that you at least have support for as long as Windows is around.
Yeah, I mean, the latest kind of work that we've done on bus monitoring, that was done in .NET 6, and I liked it because having the configuration file in JSON is such a relief. But then I look at the MVC5 that we've got.
Sure.
And we've got a complex configuration file to enable us to control the fact that we have monthly updates to public transport and all the network, and they're all defined in there and so on. So that's reassuring, but it's a hard life in the area. We're not, in the games market or anything, but actually, when I look that our local authorities are spending £130 million on upgrading public transport, and they don't have a lot of information, and we're trying very hard with things. But just to give an example, the government changed the contractor for monitoring speeds on roads, with the cameras. We put it into our application and we get a 20 or 30% difference between the average speeds on the roads between the old contractor and the new contractor, and we can't find out why. And so yes, we have our software, very important, but there's a lot of problems about in this sort of area.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the
really has been very helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the biggest focus of .NET in the last 5 years is to make it more approachable and more accessible for folks, right? Like I imagine you've had folks who talked about like the latest happenings at .NET 5 or .NET 6 or whatever, right, as a part of this meetup, and there's tons of really, really great innovation, and some of the innovation has literally just been making the life of the typical .NET developer easier. So like you mentioned, for instance, like configuration being an easier story to tell, dependency injection being an easier story to tell. Just like the idea of, oh, I don't really care like what kind of device is running this application. I just want to run it, right? So making that substantially more beneficial for folks. So that's the goal, I think, of .NET, is to make it the most approachable and performant programming language that exists, our framework that exists, right? And I think part of that story is trying to effectively help folks get from the older versions of .NET framework to this, right? So, tools have been built because companies understand that there's a ton of value in doing it.
I mentioned at the beginning about we've kind of been very, very much targeted at Azure,
Sure.
Microsoft stack kind of stuff. Do you see a lot of .NET solutions moving to AWS? Are you seeing people moving from Azure, or are they mostly sort of on-premise kind of porting across to AWS? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow like the moving from one cloud to another sort of thing. I'm not very interested in that, to be completely honest. I think I'm more interested in, like, if you're on-prem today and you're spending the money to like own servers or own co-located space, like, I think AWS is a great option to host .NET apps. Is that to say that there are other solutions out there? Yeah, I mean, there's tons of them, right? You can host .NET apps on like all sorts of platforms, not just the major cloud providers, right? But I think there is something to say that .NET developers can have a good life on AWS. But I'm very much of the belief that there's enough .NET applications that are running on premise for folks to not have to like, oh shit, like let's try to switch from one to the other. I think the goal should be is just getting to the cloud, period. And I think AWS is a great option for that.
We are on AWS.
Yeah.
In my organization, but we've got .NET, we've got Java, we've
Sure.
got a lot of different languages there. I think for me the difference between them is, I think Azure, if you were trying to go to a platform as a service, I think for .NET it has the options there with app service, but
Sure.
we're using .NET everywhere. We're using it in Lambdas, we're using it in ECS, we're using it in Kubernetes, EKS now, so we've got it extensively. Regarding the portability, our main reservation system is, I work for an airline, is in .NET framework, and the provider we use for that is using Remoten.
Sure.
So yeah, thankfully they are they've recently switched over to using HTTP client, because they need to do that, because they need to actually migrate to Azure very soon, which makes our life a lot easier. So yeah, we're in that journey now. We could not use that portability tool just because of the issues, but that's a really good tool. I remember using Microsoft's a couple of years ago, and yeah, it did tell me, it wasn't that detailed though. It did tell me what I need to upgrade, and it was on a different, like a personal project, but the main area I went into, the main issue I went into was entity framework. That's going there from 5 or 6 to core was a painful one.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'd love to, hear more about some of the stuff that you're doing on AWS, because I think one of the things that, we see is that we see a lot of companies that, we didn't decide to go to AWS, but we're a .NET shop and we, for whatever reason. And so like we didn't get to choose the option. We figured out how to work in AWS effectively. And I think it's really, really interesting. Like if you had, great successes, or even like some hard times, like I would love to hear. So like if you're interested, please reach out to me on Twitter and maybe we can have just a quick chat. You don't need to waste Derek and Bruce's time going through all of the ins and outs, but I'd be more than happy to chat with you about, and even if you're having issues that you think are service related, we can report that back to the service teams at AWS and see if we can make your life a bit better.
Sure. From a personal perspective, performance-wise, there's no difference. It's if you're in a large organization, the decision to go to one is more commercial, or well, can be. I would say Microsoft obviously wants you to go to Azure. That's why they're trying to make it, because that's where all their income is now, is on Azure. So obviously they want you to go there. But yeah, there's I've used both. There's pluses and minuses. I think AWS's infrastructure as a code with CloudFormation, everything is so much better. I forgot what Azure is called, but I like App Insights from Azure, especially from a .NET C#. You do get, I do feel you get more. We've seen better application monitoring there. So it's like with everything, there's pluses and minuses to it all. Then that's trying to sell stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as it pertains to app instrumentation and telemetry, right? Like AWS CloudWatch is a really great tool that plugs into, it gives you a similar experience to the services that you were talking about. I think that there is some area to talk a bit more about how CloudWatch can really empower .NET developers. So that's a good call out. I think in general too, like the tooling for AWS and like Visual Studio, VS Code, or Writer, a lot of folks don't even know that sort of stuff exists, right? So I think it's really, really important to talk about that when you have the opportunity to. But again, your point about from a performance standpoint, they're being more or less the same. From an operational standpoint, more or less the same. And I think one of the things that we're really trying to do is not make the decision challenging, just give options for folks, right?
Yeah, because we're in that thing of, well, the whole point of the cloud is about getting it into the cloud as quickly as possible, build your CI/CD, and if it's a production app, CI/CD pipeline. So yeah, there's that's the tool and everything like that. Yeah, we have no issues with that.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
And I was at AWS Conf in London in March, and I saw a really good demo. I think I forgot the name of it, but it was someone who got a .NET, who used a tool to got a .NET app to run and containerize it in Fargate. And
Yep.
that was I need to try it on sometime on one of our small applications, because that was really good to see that within 45 minutes. Because obviously, as soon as you containerize it, the deployment times were so much faster, because you don't have to build the EMIs.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of tools that are really, really interesting that AWS provides, right? I think so. We have two tools in that space. So we have the app2 container tool, which allows you it kind of takes your application and containerizes it. So you can deploy to some of our different container-based offerings, right? And then if you've even gone past that step and you want to start looking at, okay, does this application, does it have a bunch of different functions? Do I need to actually break this up into microservices? So there's a tool called the microservice extractor, which will actually assess your applications and kind of spin them up into different microservices so you could deploy to EKS or something like that, right? So there's tons of tools to make the life of a .NET developer better, right? And I think that what we can do better is amplify them more and talk about them.
Yeah.
For instance, taking an app and .NET app and literally running a little command on it, and all of a sudden you have it containerized and you can deploy to all different services. That's super impactful, right?
Completely.
Cool. Was there anything else? This was great. I really appreciated the chat. It's pretty crazy. We've been talking for 20 some odd minutes and it's just the four of us. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Anybody else got anything?
No, just many thanks. It's very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Isaac.
No worries. Pleasure. yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening, gents.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.